Naked Talk is where we get naked in a conversation of sexuality, intimacy, and relationship. We strip down and expose the bare facts so that you can learn what it takes for your love to thrive. Hi, I am Elizabeth Wood.
I'm Dan Powers.
With Beyond the Bedroom.
Yeah. And tonight we're going to be talking about shame. Shame, there's so many things around shame in our society, especially around sex and relationships. And so we thought we'd go ahead and talk about that this evening. We've got a couple workshops that are coming up as well that are going to be on shame.
And what really actually prompted us is we see so much of this in our client base. Each one of us has some areas where we've experienced shame. Shame is what's pervasive. I almost said like effervescent, whatever. Yeah, it's not effervescent, but it's pervasive throughout our culture. And we really thought that the time is now to address this and really kind of get down and figure out what we can do to help alleviate shame for ourselves, in our friendship groups, and certainly in our client base and for the audience members. So I think that what we should do is make it really clear what all the definitions and all the differences are between...
Sure.
Okay.
Yep, absolutely. Shame itself is really something about me, versus guilt is something that I've done. So a lot of times, we'll talk about, Let's
go back just a second.
Okay.
Shame is something that you actually take on. It's not necessarily about you, but it's something that you've taken in and internalized
about me.
About
right.
you. Yeah.
Right.
So let's be really clear about that. It's blame is you. Okay. So
blame is where I'm putting that on somebody else.
Blame is me saying to you, you are wrong. Mm-hmm. Guilt is you feel wrong.
Well, guilt is I've done something
wrong. And then shame is you are wrong.
Absolutely.
Something that you would feel. So Dan would say, or I would say, if I was feeling shame, I am wrong. So why does that happen? Why do we take so much of other people's thoughts and feelings and ideas of us that we don't necessarily, we may or may not buy into, but we take that on as something that's real for us and something that's valid. And that's the part that's crippling, is that we tend to own it as something that is ours. So
right, and I think part of it is that we've kind of combined two things. We've combined guilt and shame. Somebody says, you did this, you're a bad person. And then I'll take that and say, yeah, I am guilty, I did do that, therefore I am a bad person. When in reality, that's not true.
Want to give an example? You talked about one today.
Which one?
Your boss and the Xerox machine. Not necessarily your boss, but a scenario of a
right.
boss.
So one of the companies that I worked for in the past in the corporate world, I was brand new to the company and wasn't quite sure. I'm still trying to feel it out and understand what was really going on. And I was in a meeting with the president of the company and my boss and a couple coworkers, and they asked me for my opinion on something. And to me, I had an epiphany. Really, what we were there, these guys, I guess, probably understood it already, but I was really just grasping that what our company was doing was making a tool to help the managers look good. And so, that was the epiphany that came up to me, and I said that, and I got looks from people in the room that were kind of like, what's he talking about? Is he crazy? Which, to me, I think they actually forgot sight of that's what was actually the purpose of the company. They were trying to figure out, how can we create this really nifty tool that does all these really funky things and does this and does that. The ultimate purpose for this tool was to allow managers of what they were doing to be able to do their job easier and look good for their boss and for their company itself. And I think they forgot that. But in that moment, yes, I was guilty of saying what I said, but I took on the shame of, oh, I'm stupid. I'm don't know what I'm talking about.
I'm wrong.
I'm wrong. And one of the things that they say about shame is that you cannot be innovative. You cannot be innovative in a company if you're afraid that you're going to be shamed, if you're not vulnerable. Because to be innovative means you've got to think outside the box. You've got to come up with ideas that may sound absolutely crazy, but and they may not work, but you make mistakes, and the more mistakes you make, the more you learn from them, and soon you can kind of target in on something that really will be successful. I mean, look at all the businesses out there today that haven't been successful, and then over time they have become successful. And look at Edison. Edison, said, I failed just every time that I failed, I had to get up at least one more time. And then he invented the light bulb and many, many other things as well.
Yes, what I think is important is actually talking about vulnerability. The innovators are actually willing to be vulnerable. And from the teachings of Brene Brown, vulnerability, and there are other people who feel this way in the mental health field, if you will. Brene Brown says that vulnerability is actually the spark of creativity, the spark of invention, the innovator. And in the heart of every innovator is vulnerability, and their willingness to jump through the fear of failing. There are multiple TED Talks where the gentlemen or the women get up on stage and they're talking about some absolutely mind-blowing, sort of earth-shattering procedure or technology that they've brought out. And time again, you will hear how many times those people failed. And yet they did it again, and they knew they focused and had their sights on a particular goal, and they made themselves vulnerable each time where they admitted, this didn't work. Yet they had the fortitude and the strength to move forward and create something different, and then genius, finally, something worked.
Right,
so,
to get up one more time, to keep plugging away and chipping away at solving that problem. So how does this apply to relationships?
Well, I think oftentimes from our childhood, we've taken on beliefs that other people have, that we're not smart enough, we're not good enough, we're not worthy. Not worthy of love is a big one for a lot of people, that we've been told things in our childhood for, whatever reason. Maybe, a parent or a caretaker just wasn't able to do the job that we so wish that they were able to do for us. So we've grown up believing the stories that we've been told. You're too tall, too fat, too thin, too ugly, too dumb. And so we've taken that on, and therefore we walk into a relationship not feeling worthy or not feeling like we're enough.
Right. Look, we used to watch a show called Weeds for a little bit, and there was a woman in there whose daughter was a little overweight, but the mother was so anal about having her lose weight that she shamed her. She tried to shame her, and it didn't work. It didn't work in the show. The little girl would hide candy on her pillow. She was able to get it anyway and did it anyway. And that's really true for shame in our society today as well. And we try to, what I call it, fat shaming people, and it just doesn't work.
Shaming backfires. One of the things that we know about overeating, overspending, drinking too much, smoking too much, that unless it's in the heart of the person who is eating too much or smoking too much or drinking too much, nobody else can actually say to them, you drink too much, you need to change. So, it doesn't work. It backfires. Any addiction recovery program will tell you, please, if those people who love an addict, go to Al-Anon rather than blaming and shaming them, because those two don't work. So, I think that's a really good point. Is all of us, I said that before, all of us have shame. We've experienced shame. It's pervasive throughout our society. And when we don't talk about it, that shame just, can sort of like eat away at our psyches and our souls and our joy and our happiness and our excitement, kind of like, making sort of a Swiss cheese inside of us that we need to fill in other ways, therefore overeating, overdrinking, oversexing, overspending, whatever. So I think it's really important for us to start this conversation to let people know that you're not the only one experiencing shame. We just don't talk about it. We hide it. And we've hidden it for too long, and it's affecting relationships, friendships, workplace relationships. So, that's one of the reasons why we felt it really important to start the conversation and try to educate people around, some of the reasons why, some of the ways we experience shame, some of the ways that we can help alleviate shame. And it's different for men and women. There's some similar shames of, you're not good enough. Women, you're not pretty enough. Men.
Yeah, usually for men, it's you're not strong enough. You don't want to have a weakness. Brené Brown in her book was talking about the men that she interviewed. The first thing they said was, I don't want to be seen as a pussy. And that's, in our culture, that is, we think that weakness is or a vulnerability is a sign of weakness. And being a pussy means that you're weak, that you're not strong enough, that you're not able to hold your own and stand up to whatever you need to stand up to. She also talked about a man who came up to her and said, I just had you sign books for my wife and my daughters, but you don't talk about shame in men. And see those women over there? They would rather I die on my white horse than fail them anywhere else. It's and that's a shame. And also women want men to show a vulnerable side, but as soon as they do, a lot of times they get shamed for that. It's like, oh, you're such a pussy because you're not showing strength. I mean, they ask for that vulnerability, but they really don't want that vulnerability. They just want kind of a pretend vulnerability. And I know that's a generalization, but that's one of the things that she pointed out in her book.
Yeah. So, the difference is that the reasons why men and women experience shame, women, there's so much attention drawn to our physicality, our physique, our appearance. Women are shamed more so for that, and in the olden days, it's actually invading men and boys as well, because we hold ourselves up, including boys now and young men now, to a cultural norm that really isn't attainable by most of us. What we see in magazines, what we see on the catwalk, if you're watching any of the runway shows, are people that represent, I don't know, like one zillionth of the population.
Well, and they're photoshopped to boot.
Oh, yeah. Well, obviously not on the runway, but in the magazines, they're photoshopped to a point where even those models don't recognize themselves. So we're setting ourselves up for failure if we compare ourselves to the cultural norm. So in terms of appearance and physical, height, weight, size, shape, hair color, for heaven's sakes, all of the above, women are, I might say, more shamed based on their physical appearance than men in general. And please understand that this is a really wide generality. We also have many more young boys growing up with concerns about their weight. I mean, bulimia and anorexia are no longer just
a girl's
disease, right? It's a young person's disease, where when I was growing up, it was pretty much designated, or those people that were suffering from it were typically young girls and young women. So there are some cultural differences as to why we're shamed. I think the power and the strength and the weakness is one clear differential, because women aren't, and young girls aren't, they aren't necessarily like applauded. What's the word that I want? Supported to be like super strong and.
Not only that, but it's more feminine to be demure and weak and need the masculine energy to.
Needy. I wouldn't necessarily say need. To be the one who needs.
Well, I'm talking about our society in general. That's what they want. It's like, they want women to need men to protect them and take care of them. That's what you see all the time in the fairy tales, Cinderella and Sleeping Beauty. The prince comes in and saves the helpless girl.
Yeah, helpless.
Yeah.
I know. So, okay, you're shaking the chairs quite a bit.
Oh, sorry.
It's making me a little dizzy. Wonder what it's doing to you out there.
So why do we want to talk about shame? What's the value in it?
So basically, it's an inverse correlation. Those that talk about shame and express shame and do things that help them overcome the shame, the less shame they fear. The more we don't
feel,
and experience, the less we talk about it. The less we talk about it, and the more private and more no, don't take that on. The more silent we are about it, the more shame oozes out and crosses over into more places of our lives, and diminished joy, diminished happiness, since we're beyond the bedroom, diminished passion. So we really want to help people understand, number one, the difference between what we just said, guilt, shame, and blame, but really begin to find ways out of, I'm just making this up, the shame tunnel, the darkness of shame, because it is something that if you approach somebody that you care about and somebody that knows you and understands you, talking about some of those things or areas that you feel shame really can help ease that feeling.
And so in a nutshell, shame is preventing us from love, connection, and succeeding in the world because we're not doing things that we're worried about because of the shame that we'll adopt as a result of that. So it's valuable to explore this for those reasons.
Yeah, it's almost like we do things because we're like shame avoidant. We're trying to avoid shame. We're trying to, and listen, there are times when, we're embarrassed because we've done something, that, oops, maybe I forgot to, return that phone call for the third time, or, and so I'm embarrassed about that, but I don't feel necessarily shame. That person can out me and say, hey, Elizabeth, why didn't you call me? This is the fourth time I've reached out to you. Oh, I'm so embarrassed, but if that person doesn't say, or you were wrong. Yes, I was wrong not to call that person bad, but that doesn't mean I am wrong and a bad person. Right. I may have been busy. I may have felt sick. I may have been taking care of some other needs that in that moment seemed to be more pressing. But if I own up to my embarrassment and my responsibility in that, then I don't have to take on any sense of I'm wrong, I'm bad, which is the crux of, if you will, shame. Right. I am something.
So how often have we taken ownership of something that was embarrassing? I didn't do something, somebody calls me on it, says, hey, you're a bad person. Or how many people have done it yourselves? I know I have, where I send out an email to somebody and they don't call me back. And I'm now thinking this is a bad person. This person has not gotten back to me. They disrespected me. And when I talk to them, I said, you're a bad person. You how come you didn't reach out to me? And I'm laying all this guilt and stuff. Now, they could be embarrassed. They're guilty. Yeah, they haven't called me back. But as Elizabeth said, there may be a valid reason for it. Now, if they take ownership, so they might be embarrassed. Okay, that's one thing. But they might actually take ownership of it and say, yeah, I am bad. I guess I didn't call him back like I told him I was going to, or there was maybe a unspoken expectation, therefore I'm bad. So that's shaming as well, and that's something that we definitely don't want to do.
Right. So, I'm going to look through my notes because we actually took a lot of notes on this. Shame, again, is universal.
Everybody has shame. Is that what you mean by universal?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, everybody has shame. I have shame. The strongest people out there have shame. I'm sure President Obama has shame. And the more they try to hide it, the more shame that they probably actually have. There's actually 3 negative reactions to shame, or shame reactions. One is you run away from it. So you try to hide, you bury your head in the sand and act like it didn't happen. And so you hide from it. The other is you move against it. So people who are very anti-homosexual for example. And I'm not going to say this is everybody, but a generalization is almost the more vocal they are, it's the more shame that they have within themselves. And I've got to believe that some of these people have thought about, maybe some homosexual acts, and they're ashamed of that. And because of their belief system being the way it is, they now take that out on somebody else.
And try to shame those who have a difference. It's actually, anybody, when we shame anyone that has a difference from what we're used to or what we consider the standard or the norm, there are more times than not, due to a lack of education, there are some groups that will shame others. So it's a lack of education, specifically, more around what you're talking about.
I don't know that it's always lack of that, because, for example,
or lack of knowledge.
Right. Well, Jimmy Swaggart. Here's a perfect example. When I was in college, Jimmy Swaggart was out there. He's one of those Bible-thumping preachers that you saw on TV all the time, very anti-homosexual. Homosexuals were the spawn of the devil, going to hell, et cetera, et cetera. And then come to find out, and also, sex and all that stuff, he was caught with a prostitute. I think he might have been caught with a male prostitute as well. Same with the guy from the Family Church in Colorado Springs, Ted Haggerty.
Oh, yeah.
Similar kind of thing. Very anti-homosexual. Homosexuals are bad. Yet here he was caught actually having sex with a male prostitute. So not only was sex bad and homosexuality is bad, and he's doing both of them, what's really there?
The point of it was that he was shaming other people when he actually had no business and no right to shame them.
Right. So that's one of the negative aspects or reactions to shame. Another one is actually moving towards the shame. So if I did something that I felt ashamed of around someone, then I go and actually do more to kind of kiss their ass, so to speak, and really get in their good graces. And it almost, I don't know.
What's an example of that?
So, for example, with a former partner, I did something that I was ashamed of. I looked at another woman and said I was attracted to this other woman, and she got very upset with me. So from that point forward, I really tried to do things that would appease her. It's like, oh, I'm so sorry. Obviously, I shouldn't be this bad person and have done that to you. How stupid am I to have done that? Here, let me make you dinner, buy you flowers, all these different things that really, it was her issue, not mine. I was doing something that's normal for me. And
so if I'm remembering, because you shared the story with me, she was asking you, she was quite curious about who you found attractive, what woman, what look, what type, what style you found attractive. And so when you actually shared that with her, then she shamed you for expressing what you thought was beautiful or pretty or attractive. It didn't mean that you were going toward that pretty or attractive woman. It just meant that you were actually answering a request that she had made, and then she turned around and shamed you for it by making you feel that you were wrong or you were bad. And that's the caveat, is that he then owned what she was saying, you're bad, you're wrong, and so you internalized that and you actually felt bad and felt wrong.
Right.
So that's a good example.
Right, and that was a sense of me being vulnerable. I opened myself up. I was asked to open myself up. I did, and then I was shamed as a result of it, and I take ownership of that. And vulnerability, we've mentioned that word a lot around shame, and that's one of the things that Brené Brown talks about, is we all have to be vulnerable in order for us to have shame, or in order for us to get beyond shame.
We all do our best, our very best, to hide our vulnerability. But when we can come out and be with people who can see us and witness us and sort of, if you will, caretake us in that vulnerability, support us in that vulnerability, they actually really truly are seeing the truth and the essence of who each one of us is. Are you answering the question? Okay, so he's typing because he's answering the question. So
just to let everybody know, there will be, apparently there's been some buffering issues with some of our guests, and this is recorded, and we will have this up on our YouTube channel as well as our Facebook page, or sorry, not our Facebook page, well, it'll be there too, but our website within a week.
Okay, because he's going to take care of the questions. I'm just going to keep talking.
And then a shout out to our friends in Canada. Sorry.
Yes. So, for me, coming on camera and sitting here in front of, a wider audience, that's something that sometimes I feel quite vulnerable about. What has happened in my day, how do I think I'm going to come across? But I'm willing to come out and be vulnerable and actually talk about my vulnerability with you, especially around, I don't feel any shame in presenting. I love presenting and I love teaching, but I'm also exposing my vulnerabilities. So I will say that one of the most successful women in all of broadcasting, Oprah Winfrey, made a business out of her vulnerability. And the reason why she was loved and is to this day still loved by billions of people, probably. I mean, if you went across the world and did sort of, market research test of branding, probably Coca-Cola, everybody recognizes that, and most people recognize Oprah. She was so influential and grew to such esteem and power because she was willing to be vulnerable. She has publicly talked about her struggle with weight. She has publicly talked about her childhood and the sexual trauma that she had in her childhood. She publicly came out with so many things over time. She grew into more of her strength, the more vulnerability she revealed. And I think she changed, certainly talk shows, she changed the way that the world, and that's why she has such a big fan base, is because she was willing to come out and be vulnerable and share, if you will, her soul with her increasingly growing audience. Mm-hmm. So vulnerability is hard to do.
Yeah, but it's one of the steps in overcoming shame. When we can be vulnerable, and so being vulnerable is the first step of it, but then not taking ownership of any shame that comes our way is another step that you have to go through.
Anyone else's attempt to shame us and make us feel wrong or feel bad or feel less than. If we can really turn that around and say, that must be something in that person that they're missing or they're lacking, and I won't take that on because, in a certain situation, I might have been wrong not to return that phone call, but that doesn't mean I'm a bad person. It means maybe I'm slightly forgetful or overwhelmed with other distractions. And if I can state that and, hold on to my self-esteem and my self-worth and take responsibility, yes, I apologize for not returning your call in a more timely manner. And this is what was going on for me. I've made myself vulnerable to that person and therefore sort of maybe eradicated any need to sort of blame or attempt to shame me.
Right. So we've got a question online, and it says, should he ever get back on the feed? Sorry about the technical difficulties out there. It seems like a lot of people are kind of buffering. But how can you deal with shame in a relationship that is not acknowledged? So my question is, what I'm interpreting is that he's getting shamed and it's not being acknowledged. Okay. By his partner?
So could you add a little bit more to your question? How can you deal with shame in a relationship that's not acknowledged? So are you the one experiencing shame, or are you feeling that your partner is holding on to some sense of shame and they are not talking about it? But I think, we can try and address that if you add a little bit more.
We do have another question. It says, what do you think, and this is from our friends in Canada, what do you think of sex educators who are hiding in a closet? For example, not telling your family that you're a sex educator.
Okay, that's the big one. So do you feel shamed? Do you feel any sense of shame that you are a sex educator? More than likely, if I know this person, so actually what I should say is, can you find ways that you can be proud of the teaching that you are helping people with, or that you're disseminating into your client base or through your audience? And is there a way to tell the family? Now, my parents are significantly older, and so they never grew up sort of talking about, sex and having sort of a free conversation about it. So I shared with my parents what I do and the results of, me helping people understand the nuances of relationship, intimacy, sexuality. Yes, I answer questions. I'm a sex educator, for heaven's sakes, about sex and sexuality, and the reason why I do it. So I tell them that, really the excitement of helping a couple reconnect through sex or discover sex and done for however long, and how that fulfills me, that allows me to take what I do and the joy that I have in my life to my family, my friends, and my parents. So my question is, have they told you that it's wrong to do something like this? Have they?
Well, and it's also important to note that shame comes strongest from those we love, our friends, our relationships, because if it's somebody you didn't care about, you really wouldn't be have any shame or carry any shame around it. So it's a really great question. And I would say my answer to that is, personally, I don't have a problem if people want to keep from their family things that they're doing because it just causes extra problems. It would be sad, like my parents, they know that I do this stuff. They don't know the extent that I do it because they don't need to know, but I think it's perfectly okay that I haven't come out with them in all the gory details. Same with anybody
gory
else.
Details. They just don't need all the details, because it's something, when you feel understood, that's what we want. We want to tell, like, our favorite sister all of the details, because that favorite sister understands who we are, what makes us tick, and that this really is part of my passion and my joy. But for my dad, who's the more conservative, the Englishman, the true Englishman in him, might not understand the conversation. So I talk in generalities with him about what it is that I do and the results that I have with my client base. And so that's actually what my dad is really proud of.
Right. So there's a follow-on question from her. It says, how can we be authentically vulnerable if we're hiding that our sex is our work? Well, that's hiding that sex is our work. And, I don't think that we need to tell everything to everybody what's going on. I like what Elizabeth talked about, how she shares the work that she does. And, some people are just unaccepting of it.
And it's what are their beliefs around sex? If they don't vibrate, or if they don't resonate with yours, then maybe they're not the appropriate person to share that with, because if they're not going to understand you, they're more than likely potentially going to make you feel bad, make you feel wrong, or try to make you feel shame. So I think it's about a level of understanding. If you can have the conversation about what piece of this work really jazzes you, really excites you, really puts the kick in your step, or you jump out of bed in the morning like, oh, I just can't wait to do this. Letting them feel that without, as Dan called it, the gory details, but with all the specific details and the nuances of the intricate parts of this work, I think that might then invite them into the conversation at a level where they can actually engage in the conversation. So that was a lot of words.
Yeah.
But, don't overwhelm them with the big stuff, because they're not going to get it.
Well, and take baby steps and find people that you can get in your court as well, or on your side. If you have a sister or a brother or some family member,
uncle, maybe your mom,
right,
versus your dad,
right, that will side with you and then can help you to broach the subject with your entire family over time.
Who gets you?
Give support. Yeah.
So I hope that helped, and we actually did get a follow-up conversation from to make this a little bit more clear. The gentleman believes that his partner has a sense of shame, but won't talk about it. So
talking about it is one of the keys to dispelling shame. We hide that vulnerability from people. And first thing we have to know is that vulnerability is power, not weakness. Second of all,
vulnerability is a strength.
Yeah. Second of all, vulnerability is inevitable. It's going to happen. We all have to be vulnerable in order for us to be anything besides, a slug that's out there.
To live the most fulfilling life we can. Yeah. How's that?
Or
prettier than slug.
Yeah.
So what I would recommend is where can you find a really soft spot to talk about this? Where can you actually reveal yourself and invite your partner into that conversation with you? So let's see. You might start with something like, I wanted to talk about something that I've been feeling. Mm-hmm. And I'm a little uncomfortable, but I want to move forward with you because I think it potentially could draw us closer. And if you shared an experience about yourself and invited your partner to not necessarily respond in kind, but just hear and witness and see you be vulnerable, and don't make a story up. Mm-hmm. We've all experienced something where, we feel a little hidden. If you share that first and sort of model that you're going to survive sharing your vulnerability with your partner, maybe then your partner can be like, ooh, yeah, it is safe to go into that sort of dark and scary space that I've been hiding. But don't, start with, I feel you've been hiding some shame and I'd like to talk about it. Hello, big massive walls, thicker than Fort Knox. You're never going to get in. So make sure you sort of pick but you pick an opportunity where life isn't too stressful. If your partner has kids or overwhelmed with bills, you find a nice spot, like maybe you're out on a walk, or maybe, you're cooking dinner together, and you share about yourself first and reflect upon something that might have been painful or embarrassing or shameful to you. And then don't expect anything the first time. It's not, I did this with you, now therefore you have to do this for me. But you're making an opening. You're setting kind of a platform of safety, that it's okay to reveal yourself. And I think that might be a really good place to start, and helping your partner feel safe, that your partner can open up to you.
Right. Sharing that vulnerability is, vulnerability, we say it more and more and more, and it is key to shame and dispelling shame. Like I said, we've got to know that shame is strength. Vulnerability is strength. Vulnerability is inevitable. Vulnerability must be shared with people. You can't do it alone.
Yeah, so they can't see us if we're not vulnerable.
Right.
And I'm the queen of really not wanting to share it. But I got to tell you, every time I do, every time I am more of myself in my imperfections, the closer I feel to people. After, how many of us have had those really deep, crunchy conversations that we just didn't want to have, and yet, maybe there could be some tears, because or I might be shaking. I don't want to do this, and there's such a sense of sort of peace and calmness and much greater connection after we've worked with. So if I'm specific to myself and Dan, after we've worked through that and allowed ourselves to be vulnerable with each other. It's the glue. It's actually what creates intimacy. The more depth there is in a relationship, the more vulnerable we are, not necessarily just in a love relationship, but with our friends and with our sisters. Hey, I need some support. I'm not feeling that good about whatever. It's a connector. It's a way that we can feel really close to one another.
Yeah. And walking away from somebody when they're sharing that vulnerability, that's just the death knell for overcoming shame. And that's something that I know I need to work on as well. I'll get upset and I'll walk away from Elizabeth at times, and I'm ashamed to say it, but I do it.
He does. And see, I just waited for him to say it on camera. Because
right. I'm the one who's editing this, so I can delete it.
Yes, I can edit. We have too many people live. So I want to make sure that I follow up.
Yeah, we got another question here.
So
I have difficulty sometimes distinguishing between shame and grief. Like, I'm deeply sad because the relationship ends, or ended feels about the same as, boy, I really screwed that one up. How do I separate these feelings?
Okay, that's a really good one. So grief and sadness of a relationship that ended. So can you go back? Sad because this relationship ended. So feeling some guilt maybe about the way it ended, or some remorse about the way it ended, not feeling that great about who we were as that relationship ended. Those are all normal, because it's a way that you can reflect back and perhaps be better next time. You have more information, like, oh, I might have really said something that hurt that person at the end, and you have remorse about that. You know, and guilt offers us an opportunity to feel that remorse, and from remorse we can make changes and we can do better next time. So sadness of a relationship that ended, about our behavior and the way that we acted toward that person, that can be normal.
Well, I think that is normal.
It is, yeah.
If we're sad about something, it's absolutely normal.
Yeah, that's normal. But feeling shame is actually something that somebody else puts on you and that you own. So,
well, is it something that you can put on yourself too? Because from what I'm reading there, it's like, oh, I screwed something up. She broke up with me. I'm taking on ownership that I'm a bad person because I screwed it up. Whether she said,
well, okay, so is that behavior something that you did wrong? And you know, I don't know what the end of the relationship was about, but if you did something wrong, you had an action that was wrong, does that make you wrong or a bad person? No, the behavior was wrong. And that's what I'm talking about in terms of remorse. You can alter
is the behavior wrong, or was it her stuff? Even I think that's something you need to look at.
I don't know enough about the breakup, but you know, if they're
so there's guilt, as in you did something, so you did something, so you're guilty of that, whether that's right or wrong
in this situation. So you're now globalizing.
Right.
So okay, let's maybe do it this way. So let's say that there's a couple that's together, and one of them cheats on the other person. That behavior was wrong. And so a lot of times, if then the affair is discovered, we take on, you know, a guilty feeling, some remorse, a sense that we betrayed that other person. All of those behaviors were wrong, but it doesn't mean that the person who did the affair or who had the affair is a bad person. Doesn't mean that that person is wrong. Doesn't mean that that person isn't worthy of, you know, trying to work on it, and if comes back to the relationship with an apology and remorse and wanting to make it better in the relationship where the trust was broken, that person's making amends. And you know, so I just want to stick really clearly to that shame is something that we take on. I am bad, I am wrong, versus the behavior that I might have exhibited, that being wrong and that being bad. It's more of a sense of like, I'm not worthy of love. I'm not, you know, pretty enough. They're all like, I am not, and fill in the blank. Actually, I think those are really good
I'd go back to what she was saying. You have an affair, and you can't necessarily take on ownership of, oh, that makes me a bad person, because there's so many different factors that can go into something happening. You know, there's low moments, there's weaknesses that we have.
Sweet. I just read this question, the trail of this question. I didn't screw it up, it just feels that way. That like totally touches me. That's such a sweet spot. And with that former partner, you know, what have you learned from that relationship? What can you write about the relationship and the way that it ended? What have you learned from it? And might that former partner be able to then, you know, what can you apologize for? What was your responsibility in that end, in the end of that relationship? And can you, you know, eventually, maybe it's too soon, but can you ever go back to that person and say, this is what I really enjoyed about our relationship, and this is what didn't feed me or didn't feel good? You know, but it seems like you've had enough space, or maybe have had enough space, and yeah, it hurts. Maybe you weren't at your best, But you know what? We're not always at our best in relationship. And relationships hurt, even if they're, can sometimes hurt, even if they're the most loving relationship. That's how we grow. We trigger each other. We trigger our friends. And relationships, being in relationship is some of the most profound and the most difficult and the most joyful learning. So what did you learn from that past relationship? And can you take that back to your former partner with appreciation and say thank you so much? And apologize for the behaviors that were wrong.
If you take ownership of those as being wrong behaviors, it may be that you like watching football on it's college football on Saturdays, and that's a behavior you're not going to change, and that's because that's something you like. And if she didn't like that, that's really her issue, saying, hey, I can't live with somebody who likes to watch football, but this is what I want to do.
How can we negotiate it?
Yeah.
Maybe I won't watch the games that the teams don't affect me. What are they, divisions? Maybe I'll only watch the teams that are in division. If you care enough about the relationship, you would negotiate ways, to help your partner feel included and help your partner feel happy.
Right.
So anyway, okay, so it ended as well as it could have. Yeah, that's what we hope for, that we take care of our partner's feelings, or we can't actually take care of them, but that we actually care about our partner's feelings as we're ending a relationship. That's a person who's worthy of caring for. Relationships that end, it hurts. It does. There's no way of getting around it. But if we can kind of love that person through that process and hope that they're loving us the same way, we can be open that this didn't work, but it doesn't mean you're a bad person. It just means, to that former boyfriend, that we're not right for each other any longer. The lessons have been learned. I wish you all the best, and that you find happiness in the ways that you seek happiness. So
I think it's one of the things that happens in our current day relationships around marriage. We make these vows that say we will be together until death do us part, and because we're living longer and women now aren't stuck in the home, they're actually out experiencing life as well, we have this tendency to kind of grow off in different directions sometimes. And it just doesn't make sense for us to always stick around, even if we have kids as part of that. But because we have this agreement, I think a lot of us get really upset when divorce is inevitable. It's like, well, you're a bad person because you're not committing to this agreement. And really, if we could both recognize that, we've changed, we've become different people, in some cases, not all cases, but we have become different people, and it just doesn't make sense for us to be together anymore one-on-one, then I think our breakups would be that much smoother in general. Like I say, a former wife of mine, we're actually good friends now, and it took a long time to get there. But she was really upset and angry with me because I broke a promise to be together for the rest of our lives.
But hard promise to keep in this day and age.
Right. It didn't make sense.
It's a false promise to attempt to keep.
We were completely different people, moving off in completely different directions, wanting goals to be achieved that were different for each other, and they weren't compatible with each other. So it made more sense. Now she's living in another state. We talk probably once a week. We both have our kids together.
She's very friendly and fun to me. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's great. I really love the relationship I have with her now. And I didn't take on, originally I did take on the shame of, I must be a bad person because I didn't meet my agreement with her to stay together for the rest of our lives. And now I've let that go and recognized that, it's the way things were, it's the way things needed to be, and I'm sorry that it happened the way it happened. But I can still love her, and I've stayed loving her even through the thick of it. And today, like I said, we're good friends.
Yeah. Okay, so I want to get back to this went really quickly. Okay, I want to say that we are going to expand on this in our monthly workshops. For those of you who are in the Boulder, Denver area, the details of that are going to be on our website. But we're going to lead a 2.5-hour workshop on men's shame, and really get into how women shame men, and we've got to stop. And then the next
and how
month,
men take ownership of that
and then
too.
how men own it. And then the next month, the workshop we're going to do is on women's shame, and we're going to go really deep, dive deep into the differences. And there are a lot of similarities. Religions shame us, families shame us, and I want to again go back to culturally, we are definitely shamed. Shame is, okay, so fill in the blank, and all of us can fill in the blank, probably, sadly, way more than just one time. So shame is, I am not blank, fill in the blank, enough. I am not blank, fill in the blank, enough. So that's about worthiness, a feeling of belonging, you know, and that fear of being seen as someone who's not worthy. So we do a lot to try to avoid shame, and a lot to try to avoid the conversation of shame. So, you know, we've kind of numbed ourselves around vulnerability, and I thought it was beautiful the way Brene Brown described it, that we've numbed ourselves so that we actually don't feel vulnerable by, you know, just the things that I said. We're a country that single-handedly has more debt per household, more credit card debt, more spending. We are sadly an obese nation. We have more addictions, you know, shopping, sex, spending, alcohol, narcotics,
et cetera.
There's so many arms of addiction, and those are ways that we numb ourselves around feeling and expressing our vulnerability. So the interesting part of this is that what happens when we numb ourselves from feelings, we think we're trying to be sneaky, and we think that we're only numbing the bad feelings. No, 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 no. We're numbing ourselves of all feelings. So by trying to avoid the painful ones, we're actually kind of squashing our ability to feel joy, happiness, pleasure, you know, laughter, all of those. So don't think that you're fooling your bad feelings and bad emotions. You're not. Emotion is emotion is emotion. So that's another reason that we want to share this information with you, is because it's so important when you realize that numbing is numbing. Like, you know, when he's going in there with the, what's it called? The Novocaine? Like inside the upper tooth, he's going in there because he just wants to get that spot. Hello? When the drool is going out of this side of your mouth, and you're like, oh, hair. It's just like Novocaine. You can't just numb one part. The whole area gets affected.
Well, and I think it's a lot like our antidepressants as well.
Yes.
You know, we have a culture that's addicted to antidepressants because we're so overstimulated. And the problem is, not only do we not feel the bad pain, but we don't feel the good stuff as well with those. I have a recent client that took herself off of antidepressants, and she's completely overwhelmed with the positive feelings as well as the bad feelings. And she's starting to learn to manage both of them and be able to really enjoy the sensation of both of them as well. I've had to coach her a number of times on, you know, hey, the negative things are negative. They're there to, you know, for a purpose. We learn from them and use those. But then when the good things come around, it's really nice to be able to acknowledge and see those as well.
There's a really, really good question, and I want to try and address this. So this is a different slant on shame than what we've been talking about, but she's asking, how would you phrase it to kids so as not to give them a sense that sex is a shameful topic? Wanting them to understand, but not necessarily share the things in the schoolyard that we talk about at the home. That's such a beautiful question, and I love the fact that you're taking such care of your children and not telling them that sex is shameful or dirty. But you can ask them, you know, you can share with them that it's a very private discussion. It's something that
peers aren't going to understand.
That some of the kids won't necessarily understand, but that it's part of human nature. It's part of their developing body. You have to be age appropriate, which I'm assuming that if you're sharing this with your kids, you're one of those good parents that appropriateness of when to tell them what types of information are out there. There are so many books on what's appropriate for a preschooler, and then what's appropriate for a 5th grader, and what's appropriate for a 7th grader. We all got to know.
Sex conversation's not appropriate, when they're pregnant walking in your door.
Yeah, that's a little too late. But there are so many books out there that can help you with this, because the more we help our children understand that sex is a biological, healthy, normal function at the right age. But we all know that the internet is pervasive. So these kids as young as 5, 6, and 7 are out there, and they're typing in those words that someone's snickering about in the schoolyard, like dirty sex. They're going to find more than probably we want them to find. So engaging your children in that conversation and welcoming them to bring their questions to you, and not shaming them for their curiosity and their sense of play around it. Let them know that certain things are private and certain things that they can, if they're at the age where they're first discovering masturbation, it's a healthy and normal function, a wonderful part of their bodies to explore. But they do it in the privacy of their room. They do it by themselves. All of that, managing their concerns, managing their fears around it, and also taking responsibility for really being the primary educator of your children. Oh, thank you for that.
Yeah, well, and I would say that a lot of friends that I have that are now sex educators in the industry, they started off by being very well educated by their parents, and their friends came to them because they knew fact-based information and were able to talk about things in a very clear way that other kids didn't know. They were making it up or whatever, but if your kids know the facts based on what it is you tell them, and teach them to be discerning as to who and what it is they pass around,
yes,
information-wise, because not everybody is open and can accept that. And potentially they could be shamed by somebody who's calling them a bad person for knowing some information because they're ashamed themselves that they don't know it. But I would say that people that were educated about this in that structured way were much more
healthy in their adult and adolescent relationships. Yeah. So, it sounds like that's I'm going to assume that that's your goal, is to provide your kids with a fact-based, really healthy sense of, the joys, the pitfalls, and the curiosity around sexuality. So job well done. I definitely applaud that. So, babe, we got to look at the time.
Oh, yep. We've run out of time.
No, we have 2 full minutes. 2 minutes. So, I want to say, all right, here's the end. That about wraps up tonight's Naked Talk. We want to thank you for being a part of this potent conversation, and there's so much more. Thanks to our sponsor, Tantra Dakini, the online resource where you can find all types of materials relating to sacred and spiritual sexuality. Thank you again, tantradakini.org. Please check out the website for the listings on these classes if you're local. They're at Brio in Denver. Mm-hmm. And if I can remember the dates, September, it's a Tuesday. September 30th, the last Tuesday of this month, and then I believe it's October 21st. But it is on our website at Bed 30th. Events. September 30th is the men's, and October 21st is the women's. All this is on bedevents.com. If you're local, we have so many fabulous offerings that are coming up in actually one next weekend.
One this weekend. We have one this weekend on erotic reflexology. We'll have one in Denver and one here in Boulder. So we're very excited about that. Steve Steinberg, he was our guest last Naked Talk. So we're very excited to have him in for that. And then we're doing teachings in October, and then November we have some special out-of-town guests. So stay tuned. TBA. Stay tuned. Watch often. Thank you so much for all of you who contributed these great questions for today. This is a really lively conversation today. Yeah, time flew. Yeah. For more, if you have other questions not relating to the topics that we talk about in the Naked Talk, please feel free to submit
response. We have a good one that we're actually going to blog about that came across the website, and it's going to be interesting to see how Dan answers it versus how I answer it. So we love hearing from you.
Are we going to have a vote on that?
No vote. It's just, they'll probably be able to tell.
Can I shame you if I
which
win?
was, no, you can try, but I won't take it on. Because I'm a winner no matter what he says. All right. We want to say good night. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Yep. Bye.
Bye.